Daniel Boone was born on November 1734 near present-day town of Reading, Pennsylvania. He was one of 11 children born to Squire Boone and Sarah Morgan. He would go on to earn great fame as a hunter, soldier, politician, statesman, woodsman, and guide. And to this day, he is a household name that inspires images of adventure and life on the frontier that are now long gone. Many books have been written on this legendary figure's life. One incident comes up over and over, and that is Boone's claim that he once shot and killed a 10-foot-tall, hair-covered beast called a Yahoo or Yeho. Now, I don't think this is actually a Bigfoot. I think this is sort of like a hybrid Bigfoot. This was in the region that would one day become Kentucky or West Virginia. Now, it was easy to see why biographers of Boone would not know what to think of such a claim. Daniel Boone was known to not suffer fools very easily, nor did he tolerate being thought of one. In other words, he didn't like stupid people, and he didn't like to be perceived as stupid. Now, this is obvious to anyone who reads a lot of Daniel Boone's books. That being the case, it seems a little bizarre that he would make this claim unless it was true. Now, some biographers go into more details than others about the alleged incident. However, all seem to agree on the basic details of how the story came to be. Late in his life, Daniel Boone was a guest of a group of distinguished citizens at a dinner held in his honor at an inn in Missouri. At the end of a meal, there was sort of a question and answer session of sorts. Now, it was at this time that one of the men in attendance asked for Daniel Boone to tell everyone a story. Now, the story that Daniel Boone picked was a story that he had talked about multiple times towards the end of his life, which is the story of him shooting a 10-foot-tall, hair-covered Yahoo in the Appalachian wilderness many years before. But before he could even finish his story, one of the men listening laughed out loud and declared the story impossible. Now, accounts indicate that Boone was deeply offended and refused to continue telling the story despite the requests of the others in attendance that wanted to hear the story. Now, the awkwardness of the situation led to the premature end of the get-together, and people began to quietly leave. Now, after most of the others had left, the innkeeper's son found Daniel Boone in his room and asked him to please continue the story. He was interested. Daniel Boone then said he didn't like to talk in crowds, and I would not have opened my lips had that man remained. Well, we're alone now, the boy said. Daniel Boone is said to have smiled wryly before saying, "You shall have it," and finishing the story for the young man, and a few people had quietly made their way into the room once it was obvious that the storytelling had now recommenced. Now, while Daniel Boone never received much in the way of formal schooling, and his spelling was notoriously creative, for lack of better words, he read well. His early favorites were history books, and he also took a strong liking to Robinson Crusoe. Later, the two books that dominated his reading were the Bible and Gulliver's Travels. It is said that he would read Gulliver's Travels to his men while he was traveling in his younger years. Now, Daniel Boone, being very familiar with the Yahoos described in Gulliver's Travels, if he had ever come in contact with a huge, hair-covered, human-like beast in his years of traveling the American wilderness, calling the beast a Yahoo based on the description of the creatures written in the book seemed natural enough. To this day, the names Yahoo and Yeho are still used to describe a Sasquatch-like creature that is said to roam the mountains and forests of Appalachia. Now, a lot of critics say that Boone's tale of shooting a Bigfoot-like creature is just a campfire story meant to entertain his followers and fans who were hanging on his every word. A lot of people say he just stole the idea from Gulliver's Travels. Boone biographer Robert Morgan would seem to concur and wrote that he, Boone, was also known to tell tales about encountering great hairy monsters like Yahoos in Gulliver's Travels. Most likely it never happened. It is hard to blame Morgan for having doubts about such a fantastic claim, but he dismisses the tale without any elaboration. While the story might be hard to take at face value, Morgan himself writes about the integrity of Boone and how much he valued his reputation. It would seem proper for the author to explain why the famous woodsman would veer from his normal character and fabricate a story about having killed a monster, especially when it seems all scholars agree regarding how offended he was when his story was challenged after dinner. Now, Boone is said to have related the tale of the Yahoo on multiple occasions, most often during the last years of his life. Others point out that this could just be the deathbed confession phenomenon, where people confess all manners of things when they realize the end of their life is near. Such confessions are thought to help alleviate feelings of guilt, regret, or just things that they want people to know about them. Even though it's true that Boone told the story of the Yahoo multiple times over his final years, he did not tell it on his literal deathbed. But that doesn't mean anything. That was probably the last thing on his mind at the time. Still, Boone's health was beginning to wane, and any man, once he reached the age of 85, would realize that there was precious little time ahead of him. In the past, Boone didn't bring it up, probably because he didn't want to be ridiculed if it had happened, especially during that time period. It is highly doubtful that we will ever know the truth of whether or not Daniel Boone shot and killed a Sasquatch-like creature. But what is true is that Daniel Boone spent more time in the American wilderness than just about any white man who has ever lived. That being the case, if the Sasquatch is a real creature, who would have been more likely to eventually come across one than Daniel Boone? What do you think of this story? Do you believe in Sasquatch, Yahoos, or cryptids? Let me know in comments, and please subscribe if you haven't already to help us grow and continue to do stories like this.